The State Director of Not For Sale, Tennessee. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And so when we talk about the topic of human trafficking, essentially what we're talking about is slavery.
That's right.
Modern day slavery. Define it for us. What does it mean, human trafficking?
Well, you know, it's interesting we have to define it because drug trafficking is the #1 criminal activity in the world and everybody knows about it. But human trafficking is the #2 and fastest growing criminal activity, and yet most people know little to nothing about it. And you hit the nail right on the head. Human trafficking is a euphemism. It's a little more palatable way of saying slavery. So we are talking about modern day slavery. Slavery is what it has always been. It's involuntary servitude. It's labor without compensation beyond sustenance. And traffickers will take total control of a victim. They will force them into labor, service, or the commercial sex trade. And they maintain that control through violence. That might be brutal beatings. It might be repeated rapes, threats of severe harm to the victim, many times to their families, as well as lies, deception, psychological abuse, and manipulation.
So when we're talking about human trafficking, does it have to do with the sex trade? I mean, you certainly mentioned that. That's one thing. What are some of the other things?
There can be domestic servitude. There are children who are bought to be servants in homes, women. There can be restaurant workers, factory workers. This can be somebody who is in a brothel behind locked doors or in a factory locked up behind locked doors, or it can be someone in a legitimate legal business setting. It can be somebody who works in an underground market, or it can be someone in plain sight. There's such a lack of awareness that the people who come in contact with victims don't even recognize it, and so there's little victim identification.
And are we talking about people that are coming to the United States from other countries that have been brought here under false pretense, or are we talking about children that you see on milk cartons who have been missing and have been abducted from neighborhoods, you know, in another state, or maybe even right here, that have then been put into servitude, you know, doing horrible things?
All of the above. We have about 17,000 people trafficked across our borders each year. Many of them promise the American dream, a great job, education for their children. Many of them come legally with a passport and a visa that is taken away from them, and they find out on the other end that it wasn't quite what they expected. But it happens to U.S. citizens as well.
And U.S. citizens, that amazes me. Now, I've certainly heard and probably you've seen on TV these situations where someone in another country believes they're coming here to work in a restaurant and make some money, but in fact they are, you know, sent into the sex business.
Yes.
But what we are also saying is this happens to children here in the United States.
Yes.
How prevalent is that?
Well, tragically, of the 27 million slaves in the world, half of them roughly are children. I just read a study by the University of Pennsylvania that said at least 100,000 American children per year are used for prostitution or pornography. And a very simple statistic, but it never fails to pierce me, is that 2 children are trafficked into sexual exploitation per minute.
Well, that's astounding. And so let's say right here in Nashville, how common is it? Are there people who have been brought here as trafficked here, I guess? Are there people that have been brought here from other states and people that have been brought here from other countries right here in Nashville, Tennessee?
Absolutely. I'll tell you a quote from David Batstone in his book, Not For Sale. He said, if you look behind the facade of any major city or town in the world today, you're likely to find a thriving commerce in human beings. You may even find slavery in your own backyard. And you will. If you live around here, it is in our own backyard.
Where? I mean, where would we find it? Are we talking about if you go to some of the I guess, strip clubs or prostitution areas? I mean, that's where this is happening?
That's how we typically think of it. Oh, in a big city, in a bad area. But more and more, this is a computer-based industry. So traffickers can work in residential areas, in a normal home, and they do. It can happen anywhere. You know, it's not in our grid to think about the people next door being slaves or the person down the street being a slave owner, but they just might be.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. And Not for Sale Tennessee, okay, that's the organization you're with,
yes.
Right? Now, what is Not for Sale Tennessee? Tell me about the organization.
Well, we're the Tennessee chapter, the Tennessee expression of Not for Sale campaign, and that's a national organization with an international reach. We focus on advocacy, awareness, research, and training. And at our heart, we're a grassroots organization. So what we do is equip and mobilize people to become activists, to work in their sphere of experience and expertise and influence, to come up with innovative solutions to ending slavery.
So you're a volunteer.
I am, a 60-hour-a-week volunteer.
Wow. And what brought you to this? Why did you get involved in this?
Frankly, I was reading about an entirely different topic and just saw a little paragraph that told me a description of human trafficking, and I was floored. I had no idea anything like that happened in the world, much less in our own country. My husband would come home and find me in tears on the floor every night as I read everything I could get my hands on and watched everything. And I started calling activists all over the country to say, teach me, what can I do? What works? What doesn't work? And eventually I really like Not for Sale campaign because of the grassroots element, because I saw so many organizations that would say give money, and it takes money. I appreciate that, and I wanted to give money, but I wanted to give myself too, and I love the fact that this organization enables you to give of yourself.
Oh, that's great. And we'll tell people how they can get involved and some of the things they can do. But if this is happening, if it's so prevalent, and so many, I guess you said children are affected by this. Mm-hmm. How is it that it can keep happening? I mean, I'm astounded when you say here in the United States, children are being abducted and sent into the sex trade, basically, obviously against their will, and people are getting all kinds of money off of them. Mm-hmm. How can it keep happening? Well,
it's such a hidden crime. Let me just give you a scenario for an example. If you had a policeman pull over a car and look over the driver's shoulder and see a kilo of heroin in the back seat, obviously a crime's been committed. But if that same officer pulled over a car and saw, say, 3 Hispanic girls in the back seat, the driver would have no trouble coming up with a plausible reason why they were there. The officer probably hasn't been trained in human trafficking, so he wouldn't be suspicious enough to ask questions and get below the surface and find out what's going on in that situation. Add to that the fact that the girls are terrified. They probably had their families threatened if they speak up. Maybe they don't even speak English. And you have a crime that's really hard to uncover and really hard to prosecute.
Wow, and that's a good point. And you could sell a drug one time,
exactly,
but you could sell a human being over and over again, obviously. So it's quite lucrative for those who are involved. It's
a very lucrative industry. $32 billion a year. That's more than Nike, Starbucks, and Google, more than 499 of the Fortune 500 companies. And that's an old statistic, so it's probably more. And you hit the nail on the head again. It's because a drug can be sold once. In the case of a sex slave, a person might be sold 10, 20 more times a day.
And who are the people behind this? I mean, it would have to be a very organized group. I mean, is it the organized crime? Is it, who is it? It couldn't just be your mom and pop business type thing. I mean, this is tough stuff.
It's a very complicated crime. And at the highest levels, we are talking about organized crime. At the lower levels, you might have some small workers who make loose connections, but ultimately when you work up the ladder, you're going to get to organized crime. I mean, a person here at a strip club can order 3 Scandinavian girls, and in a week or two, they'll have them at their doorstep through the chain from the top down.
That's astounding. Okay, we're going to take a break. If you want to call and get in on the conversation, 737-plus, 737-7587. We're going to talk about more about Nashville and how this is happening right here. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.